We do welcome you back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's get the latest on so many of these big topics out of the Middle East. Joining me now is Dr. Alon Burstein. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Let's get straight into it. As we take a live look at Gaza, I want to first talk about Gaza. Netanyahu has maintained that Israel will continue its military operations in Gaza until every hostage has been returned from Hamas custody. 59 hostages remain in Hamas captivity alone. 24 of them are believed to be alive. Why is it so difficult for the IDF to find these hostages in a year and a half of war? Hasn't the IDF gone through most of, if not all, of the Gaza Strip? What do we need to know about how Hamas has kept these people hidden?
It's good to see you, Austin. What we're seeing here is almost a repetition of the beginning of the war back in October of 2023. You know, it's important to remember that the war breaks out on October 7th, 2023, with Hamas's attack and the taking of 251 hostages. The IDF did not immediately rush back against Hamas and try to get the hostages back. At first, there was a massive bombing campaign. Then there was an invasion, and we could talk a little bit about how that invasion took place. Then, after that invasion took place of northern Gaza and started to turn towards southern Gaza, there were all of a sudden negotiations, and there was a truce, and hostages returned in an exchange. Then we had another year of fighting, then another truce, and hostages returned in an exchange. So really, we see a combination constantly of ongoing fighting and then truces and negotiations. From Netanyahu's point of view, the way that it is being framed from Israel's perspective, what is happening is an increase of military pressure in order to bring Hamas back to the table. Theoretically, there's the rhetoric of the military might rescue the hostages. In practice, we know for a fact that thus far more hostages have been killed by the Israeli military in its operations than hostages have been rescued by the Israeli military as a result of those operations. The vast majority of hostages that have come back alive have come back as part of the truce and negotiations. What Israel is saying, at least, is that Hamas was not willing to renegotiate a new perspective on the deal and a new trajectory for the deal. Hamas wanted to continue on to phase 2 of the deal, which Israel didn't agree to. So Israel is now amping up the military pressure, hoping to compel Hamas essentially to come back on Israel's terms to negotiate some other, I guess, temporary truce or something like that. But that is really what Israel is hoping. There's no real illusion that all of a sudden the military is going to be able to rescue hostages, which it hasn't been able to do in all this time.
So today we saw Hamas's first real response to recent Israeli combat on the Gaza Strip. They launched a volley of rockets at Tel Aviv earlier today that set off alerts, and it sent residents running for shelters. The Wall Street Journal says one rocket was intercepted, the other two landed harmlessly. So Alon, is this evidence that Hamas, in its current state at least, is struggling to mount an effective attack against Israel?
Hamas's response to Israel's invasion right now has been actually very interesting. Those 3 rockets that were fired at Tel Aviv were fired from Han Yunis. Those were the first time that Hamas has fired rockets at Tel Aviv since October 7th of 2024. But interestingly, that is the only response that Hamas has had until now. The IDF up until now has already begun its ground invasion. It's begun a ground invasion of the northern parts of the Gaza Strip of Beit Lahia. It has taken over part of the Netzarim corridor. It is now also announced a few hours ago that it is starting its invasion of the Shabora region in Rafah. I mean, I can show all these things on the map later if we want to talk about it.
Please do, if you want, real quickly.
Where the IDF is. So just why I say it's important is because we have Beit Lahia up here where the IDF is coming in, and the Netzarim corridor, and the IDF is moving in southern Gaza. Why I say that's important is because, again, it's very reminiscent of the way the IDF initially carried out its attacks. It's skipping over the central parts here in Deir el-Balah, which the IDF never invaded throughout the entire war. According to a lot of speculation, the IDF believes that most hostages are held in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. That's why they're not invading. But one of the other things that are important to note about Hamas's response is until now, Hamas is indicating very, very clearly they don't want to go back to fighting. This is almost unprecedented in the history of states fighting terror groups. The state is invading the area. It is almost goading the terror group to say, come out and fight. The terror group so far is not fighting. It sent those 3 rockets. It has not attacked a single IDF soldier in the Gaza Strip. It has not set off any detonations of any explosives against IDF soldiers. Instead, it is appealing to the Arab League, the United Nations, the negotiating countries, and saying, stop Israel. we want to return to ceasefire. When Israel took over the Netzarim corridor again, instead of fighting Israel, which Hamas has the capability to do, it has tens of thousands of fighters back already. But instead of fighting Israel, it sent appeals to negotiators saying Israel is violating the agreement. That is really not in common with the way Hamas usually operates. So Hamas is sending very clear indications that they still would like to return to negotiations. Israel is stating it's not going to return to negotiations as they were before. Hamas has to almost come and ask for a renegotiation. That's where we are right now. Those rockets to Tel Aviv were the first indication that Hamas is willing to go back to fighting. We're obviously going to see as things develop as the IDF continues this ground invasion.
Move away from Gaza. Let's talk about Yemen for a little bit here. You're looking at a post from U.S. CENTCOM, Central Command. These are U.S. Navy fighter jets, and I think we can hit play on this, and we'll actually see the jets moving. Yep, there we go. So these are U.S. Navy fighter jets. They've been busy with Houthi targets in Yemen. This week, President Trump threatened the Houthis with complete annihilation, those are his words, as American airstrikes began pounding locations under Houthi control. So Alon, what's the challenge with completely annihilating the Houthis? They've been nailing the global supply chain since 2023. No one's been able to stop them. How likely is the U.S. to change something with these strikes?
The U.S. is, I would say, unlikely to manage to effectively change the situation with the Houthis and certainly not to annihilate them unless the U.S. was willing to commit ground forces to taking over Yemen. The Houthis took over Yemen in 2014, or at least half of Yemen in 2014. Between 2014 and 2020, Saudi Arabia, backed by a large coalition of Arab states and sometimes also backed by the United States, launched massive campaigns, way larger than what the U.S. is launching now, against the Houthis. It did not break them. So the fact that the United States right now is pounding the Houthis is certainly hurting them. It's not going to be enough to bring them down. Yemen is a big place. This is not like the Gaza Strip. And even in the Gaza Strip, the IDF has not managed to defeat Hamas yet. Certainly, these airstrikes are not going to defeat the Houthis. What I think President Trump is trying to show with these airstrikes is that, first of all, bolstering the United States' position in the Middle East, while on the one hand, he has made clear time and again that he does not want to engage in wars. He does not want to start new wars. He still wants the United States to be seen as the strong man in the Middle East and, sort of don't mess with us. He's also hoping, very, very likely, to compel the Houthis to come to some sort of agreement to stop attacking international commerce, to stick to their own. The U.S. doesn't care really. The Houthis stay controlling Yemen, to stick to their own. One of the interesting dynamics here also is how this relates to the ongoing negotiations between the United States and Iran. Iran is a big backer of the Houthis. It's not a direct line. It's not like Hezbollah, which was an arm of Iran. The Houthis are backed by Iran, but Iran can't control everything they do. However, the U.S. president did make a public statement saying that any attack that is made by the Houthis will be seen as an attack as though it came from Iran, i.e., the Houthis attack, we can attack Iran. Now, the Houthis defied that. They have launched 4 ballistic missiles towards Israel, towards Jerusalem, in the last 2 days. So far, the United States has not attacked Iran. So this is part of also the game as the United States is continuously negotiating or preparing to negotiate possibly a new nuclear deal with Iran, and it's flexing muscles. Is Iran going to rein in the Houthis? Is the United States going to manage to defeat the Houthis? Very, very likely what we're going to see is this ongoing game of cat and mouse until it comes to negotiations between the United States and Iran, and very likely part of those negotiations are going to be some sort of nuclear deal, possibly spiraling down, but alongside that, Iran has to rein in the Houthis. That's probably where we're going to see this continuing cat and mouse game, because this is just, I would say, a pawn in the larger game between the United States and Iran at this point.
A live look at Jerusalem on what is now Friday morning, Israel Standard Time. One more thing I want to ask you before we go. Ukraine and Russia alone agreed in principle to a limited ceasefire after President Trump spoke with the country's leaders this week, though it remains to be seen when it might take effect and what possible targets would be off limits to attack. My question about the Middle East as it relates to this is, are Israel-Hamas and other Palestinian leaders watching these Russia-Ukraine negotiations closely? Is there anything they can learn about how the U.S. is doing business?
I think certainly Israel is watching, because in this game, as it was, Israel would be compared to Ukraine and Hamas would be compared to Russia, in as much as during the Biden administration, the United States was very, very allied with Ukraine and to large extents was allied with Israel. There's been a lot of complaints between Israel and the United States about the relationship between Netanyahu and Biden. Nonetheless, that was the alliance, and sort of the evil that both allies were fighting were Russia and Hamas. Then all of a sudden, in comes President Trump. And one of the things that you and I talked about when we had the famous press conference between Netanyahu and Trump is I said Netanyahu is standing there smiling. Honestly, Trump could have said anything he wanted, and Netanyahu would have smiled and said that's a brilliant idea because Netanyahu understands what Zelensky didn't understand. Netanyahu understands that at the end of the day, what matters is the personal relationship with Trump. What matters is, does Trump perceive you as the one that's going to help him to bring stability if he wants to bring stability? And so Zelensky didn't understand that. They had the disastrous meeting in the White House. And as a result, Trump just started negotiating with Russia over the head of Ukraine. Similarly, I think Israel saw Adam Boehler, the special envoy of hostages, negotiating with Hamas, excluding Israel. And I think in Israel, there was a panic button that was hit saying, oh my God, that can happen to us. We are the allies of the United States. But if Trump does not perceive that we are helping him promote his agenda, what he sees as the vision, all of a sudden, the United States negotiated with Russia over the head of Ukraine. The United States could possibly even negotiate with Hamas over Israel's head. As a result of that, Israel really, really amped up. On the one hand, the personal relationship with Trump. You see Israeli government almost every other day saying how much it values President Trump and how much it values his contribution to the region. Israel again and again saying that all of its moves in Gaza are coordinated and have the blessing of Trump. Nothing is done against what Trump says. All this is in light of looking at what happened with Russia, Ukraine, looking at Ukraine's position, saying it relied on the United States. It's theoretically on the same side, but Trump doesn't go by the same diplomatic channels that are common in the world. He's very, very likely equally to go above the allies and go to the other side if he thinks that'll help promote his vision. So I think Israel's looking at that and probably being very weary. And I'll just say one more thing in relation to Yemen. That is very likely the reason that the Houthis have launched by now 3 to 4 ballistic missiles targeting Jerusalem, Israel's capital. And yet, according to reports, the United States asked Israel, do not retaliate. We're fighting the Houthis, not retaliate. Not a peep. Israel has not sent a fighter jet, a missile, nothing back. Israel's going to be very, very careful about defying the United States for fear that what happened to Ukraine could happen to it also.
Alon uploads his own Middle East updates on his personal YouTube channel. You can go give him a subscribe there. As always, Alon, good to see you. Have a good night.